Thank you so much. This is amazing. I am just taken back by the number of secondary educators, advocates, professionals in this room at this time of the school year for secondary literacy for the first time that we're pulling together a group for this very important cause. So I wasn't sure as I was speeding here how large of an audience we would have, but this is just exceptional, and it speaks volumes to the priority of this work in education across the Commonwealth. So I am so thrilled that you are here. Thank you for joining us and making this a priority in the work that you are doing. Here with us today, we have educators and we have literacy advocates, everyone dedicated to advancing literacy skills to secondary learners. Today, you will embark on a journey to explore evidence-based practices, research-based strategies, sharing your practices with each other's, all unified together for the passion of secondary literacy, a movement across the Commonwealth that has been going on for many, many years, but we continue to press the mission K through 12 and beyond in the Commonwealth. And we could not have done this without the leadership of Dr. Pam Kastner. I did not want to close out today without thoroughly elevating the work and the legacy that she's leaving in Pennsylvania as she embarks, as we all know, on her next journey. Nobody ever really retires from education in Pennsylvania. So she will be leaving us to embark on her passion in a whole nother capacity, I'm sure. But it would be so wrong for us not to have her leave and the Bureau recognize the impact and influence she has had on so many educators and learners across the Commonwealth in her time. So I did want to just take some time to recognize her and give her a round of applause while I'm here. Thank you, Pam. Absolutely. Exceptional. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And I really hope you enjoy this day. This will be one of many, and you're able to learn from each other, learn from the sessions, and take it back to really have an impact on all of our learners across the Commonwealth. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Kastner. Thank you. How you doing?
Oh my goodness. So many of you know me, and so you know how hard it is to even think about leaving Patton. It's a testimony to the patent literacy team. So please, patent literacy team, please stand up. This is not done alone. This is not about my legacy. It's about the patent literacy team. Please give them a round of applause. I am so very proud of the work that our team does and in partnership with our IUs. Lifelong friendships, and so grateful to have done this work for so long with all of you. So thank you for being here. There's such a need in our state, and we're making such wonderful strides, but I really feel like you do, like our secondary kids, they're struggling. They really are. And we wanted to respond to that call Patton did in our intermediate units. And I know the timing wasn't very good. It was the only day I could get the whole place to ourselves. And I thought, oh gosh, it's right after Memorial Day. And at the end of the year, and will they come? And I want you to look around this room. And I want you to give yourselves a round of applause for being here and being so dedicated to your students to improve their literacy. And so excited for the presenters that we'll have with you today. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be seeing each other. I will be teaching kids probably till the day I die. I can't help it. Aren't we so lucky to work in a profession where we can serve? It's just been a wonderful life. It really has. So thank you for the honor of even just standing in front of you. It's going to be a wonderful day. We have an incredible speaker to start us off, Dr. Sharon Vaughn. I'm sure many of you know her seminal research that she's been engaged in for many decades, although she looks so young. And she will be talking to us about, of course, adolescent literacy. When initially we asked her to present, she lives in Texas, so the time differential is 1 hour. But she is at this time on the West Coast. So Dr. Vaughn got up very early. It's 5 40 there right now. So we need to give her applause for just being with us so early this morning. God bless her. And I'm sure you all saw Dr. Anita Archer greeting people. I mean, I don't know, the best greeter that ever existed, right? So we just have amazing folks with us here today. So here's how a big picture of the day. Dr. Vaughn will do a keynote address for about approximately 1 hour. At 8:45, our wonderful support staff will be coming in to close the divider here between conference room 1 and conference room 2. And we'll have a 15-minute break between the keynote session and the first session from 10 to 11. All right. There will be support staff at Patton on the way as you traverse. I always feel like a little bit like Hansel and Gretel, like where are the breadcrumbs? So just to direct you where you're going, and there will be Patton facilitators and IU friends supporting in each of those rooms. From 10 to 11 first session, then you'll come back here to navigate a box lunch. The divider will be open from 11 to 11:30. Our hope is that you can, get your lunch and be seated by 11:30 to engage with the indomitable, the one, the only Dr. Anita Archer. I don't know how many of you have never seen her, but if you have not, today is a day that you will always remember. I learn as much from watching Anita teach as she teaches us, and that's really saying something. She has been a longtime friend of Patton and has been coming to us for decades. And with COVID, it's been a while since she's been here. So it's such a celebration to have her back with us here in Pennsylvania. So she has never done a lunch keynote. So she was like, oh, are they going to be eating and talking? I'm like, no, they're going to be mesmerized by every word that comes out of your mouth. So Pennsylvania, I'm counting on you, right? And Dr. Archer, she's very good at proximity control. I watched her the first time I saw her was at Plain Talk. So if any of you have been to Plain Talk, you know how big that is, right? And so maybe 600 or 700 people in the room. She always has the room to capacity. And there was a gentleman for some reason who definitely had not been to Anita Archer presentation before, who sat in the back and then opened a newspaper. And I just watched her. What are the odds you think of that person can continue to read their paper? Yes or no? I have core response. No. Completely engaged. So she will be our keynote from 11:30 to 12:30. Then we'll have that 15-minute break. So you can go to session 2, 12:45 to 1:45, a 15-minute break, and then 2 to 3. So I got you out early because it's summer it feels like summer at least. So I wanted to get you out a little bit early. I do have sad news about Mitchell Brookins' sessions. He is very sick. He very much wanted to be here, but he's very, very sick. And so if you were going to attend one of his sessions, just choose another one that is interesting to you. The only one, Dr. Moran's sessions for Socratic Seminar are limited to 20. And so anyone who's in those sessions, you're the lucky ones. And I'm sorry, other ones will not be able to participate in that. But any other one, please attend. All right. Okay, so you're feeling good? All right, so we'll let Dr. Vaughn get started. I'll put something in the chat so she knows to get started. All right, here we go.
Good morning. How are you all? It's great to be here with you. And I just have to say, I am excited about spending the hour with you. And while I do my presentation, if you have any questions or comments, please jot them down, because at the end, I will leave time for them. And I just also want to ask Patton if they could please, in the future, when they invite me, do not invite Anita Archer. And I say that because whenever I have to present, either before or after her, it is a terrible comparison group, because she is the best presenter that I have ever seen. So it always humbles me to be in a position to either speak before or after her. So today I'm going to be talking about secondary literacy. And in the process of doing that, I'm going to try to persuade you about doing something that sounds like math, but I'm going to ask you to apply it to reading. And this idea is to think about subtraction as the important component of being a better teacher rather than addition. Now, you may wonder, why do I say that? Why am I asking you to emphasize subtraction? Well, the reason is because we have a tendency as human beings to want to add on to everything. So if I ask you, for example, to make a recipe that I have made before, you say to me, that is the most delicious feta chicken I have ever had. I want to make that feta chicken exactly like you do. And I give you a very simple recipe with 5 ingredients. The likelihood you will add an ingredient to that recipe is extremely high. We know this from research. This is true in almost all aspects of our decision making. We are unlikely to subtract things. We are much more likely to add them. So how could that possibly fit with my talk today? In this way. What I'm going to talk to you about today is focusing, slimming, subtracting, and organizing, embedding and aligning the way we think about teaching so that we can be more effective. And the reason this is important is because if you look at the evidence around teaching adolescents, particularly those with reading difficulties, you will find a very consistent theme. And do you want to know what that is? That theme is that after about 2nd or 3rd grade, the impact of our reading interventions declines considerably. That is to say that the impact on important outcomes in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade is much higher than it is in 4th grade through 9th grade. And I think that there are several reasons to explain that, some of which we can control. And I want us to think about the ones we can control. And one of them is by making our instruction more parsimonious, not expanding it, making our instruction more aligned. That is to say, providing as much practice as possible, Anita Archer's critical word for success, and embedding important elements into reading instruction. So let's get started even further into how we might put these ideas into place. So first, let's talk about intensifying intervention. What we think about is that when we want students to be more successful, we think about ways to make the intervention that we provide more intense. And there are approximately 4 critical ways you can do that. One of the ways you can make instruction more intense is that you can change the dosage. And that means you can increase the amount of instruction. So you can, instead of providing instruction for 30 minutes a day, you can provide it for 40 or 45 minutes a day. Or you can change the overall amount of time in a week. So if you don't change it every day, you can say, for example, in given weeks, we are going to increase the amount of time. So dosage is one way to intensify instruction. A second way to intensify instruction is to change the learning environment. And the way you do that is, for example, if there's too many distractions and students are having attention problems, you change the learning environment. Or if students are disengaged, you think about how to change the context, the text that they're reading, or other mechanisms for promoting engagement. Perhaps additional practice items will do that. So 2 ways: dosage and learning environment. Third way. The third way is to combine cognitive processing strategies with academic learning. Okay, what do I mean by that? For example, as students get older, middle school and high school, the way in which they learn this complex task of literacy involves a lot of executive functioning in which they have to monitor what they're reading, they have to make connections, and they have to link together in summaries and main ideas what they're getting. So they're reading for understanding. This cognitive processing requires, and it doesn't come for free, it requires attention, but it also requires a high level of fluency with reading. Because if you're not really fluent, too much of your cognitive processing goes into reading the words, and you don't have enough cognitive processing left to understand what you're reading. So idea number 3 about intensifying intervention, we have dosage, we have learning environment, and we have thinking about cognitive processing within academic learning. And then the fourth way we can intensify instruction is to modify the delivery of instruction. And I can promise you this, the absolute pro at modifying delivery of instruction is Dr. Archer. She is going to not just tell you how to do that at lunch, she's going to show you how to do that. And this modification of the delivery of instruction can be something like giving opportunities for feedback, deliberate practice, giving opportunities for explicit instruction that allows students to respond to the precise needs they have in order to acquire proficiency. So this modification of the delivery of instruction is exceedingly important. And I just want to call to your attention that when I was giving examples of this delivery of instruction, the one thing I said was deliberate practice. And I want you to think about that word deliberate because I use it deliberately. And instead of practice, just practicing the same thing over and over again, I'm asking you to think about locating the very thing students are needing to practice, not practicing something they already know. So for example, let's say that what you wanted to do was become more proficient at playing the piano. If you want to be more successful, practicing a piece that you already know how to play is unlikely to give you anywhere near the rewards in terms of improving your skills as a piece that you are less successful at. That deliberate practice of learning and acquiring proficiency in something that you are not as successful at increases beneficial outcomes, not just in something like playing the piano or your golf swing, but also in the classroom. So think about not just practice, but making sure that practice is exactly what students need. So we've sort of set the stage for how to intensify instruction, which is absolutely essential at the secondary level. We cannot be successful if we don't think about dosage, learning environment, cognitive processing, and models of delivery of instruction. Now, where did my glasses go here? I'm in my own, oh, here they are. Now, I'm going to talk to you about how we can put this in place in a secondary setting. And I'm going to start by showing you a study that we did. Here's the example of this study. I show you this, so I want you to know we are following exactly what Patton strives to do, which is evidence-based practices. Okay, so what's the problem? I told you that intervention studies have yielded small to negligible effects on reading comprehension for students with reading difficulties, particularly for students in the older grades. Number two, the National Association of Educational Progress, or if you will, report card, suggests that more than half of the students are unprepared to read grade level texts. So if you have 8th graders or 10th graders or 11th graders, and you are asking them to read either social studies or science or English texts, and they're at grade level, the chances they can do so successfully are very low. Thirdly, we know that reading comprehension practices applied inconsistently and infrequently in classrooms. So what happens is we decide to teach main idea, and we do that for a while, but we are inconsistent with it. And because we don't do it often enough, students do not become proficient. We rarely provide the kind of high quality vocabulary instruction that students need. And everyone knows, I'm sure everyone in this room has heard how important background knowledge is. And in fact, there's a real emphasis now more than ever on improving knowledge acquisition as a mechanism for improving reading comprehension. And the idea behind that is that it is impossible for students to become proficient at understanding text if they have inadequate knowledge or vocabulary for making connections with what they're reading. And in fact, do you know what the two most important skills are for adolescents with respect to reading comprehension? Inference making, and inference making requires you to make connections between what you know and what you're reading, and main idea, which again can only be proficiently done when you use the knowledge you have with the understanding you're getting from text and can yoke or link those in a way to create understanding. So that's kind of the problem we're dealing with. And I said that we're going to have 3 solutions to this problem. One solution is that we're going to use subtraction. So we're going to try to reduce the number of things we do so that we can do them more intensely and more purposefully. Number 2, we're going to think about alignment. That is how to align our instruction across the curriculum so that we get the biggest impact possible. And thirdly, how to embed what we consider to be the most important self-regulation practices into what we do. So let's think a little bit about what typically occurs when we have this, think of interventions or additional instruction and the classroom instruction, which I'm going to refer to as tier 1. What we typically think of is that we have non-aligned instruction. So what we do, for example, in intervention, in literacy intervention, does not align with what we're doing in English language arts. It doesn't align with the way in which we're teaching in content area instruction. And this misalignment between what we're doing in intervention and what we're doing in content areas is an incredible lost opportunity to do deliberate practice and provide a clear, focused, if you will, subtracted way of instruction. Now, why did I say subtracted? It's because if we have mechanisms for teaching reading comprehension that vary based on whether it's intervention or content, if they vary across the curriculum, so you have the science teacher doing it one way, or the English language arts teacher doing it another way, or the resource room teacher doing it one way, or the literacy expert doing it another way, you are actually asking students with the most difficult reading problems to do the hardest work of assembling all of these practices so that they can use them in their learning. So let's get rid of that. Let's subtract that and think about aligning our instruction so that whether it's in the content area or language or skills, students are acquiring proficiency the same way across classes. So when we think about that, we want to think about our reading comprehension instruction as not being compartmentalized, but being consistent. We want to think about, rather than having schools identify time in the day to provide intensive intervention separate from the way in which we teach throughout the day, we want to align it. We also want to be sure that the tier 2 or intervention type instruction that is aligned provides cohesive and integrated instruction that maximizes intensity. So the way to get students to have more proficiency is to actually reduce the number of ways in which we teach students to comprehend text. Identify 3 or 4 practices and implement these practices across the content area as well as in intervention. So we wondered, for example, what if we provided this aligned instruction for students with reading difficulties? How might that impact students' reading? Well, I'm going to show you what we did with this aligned instruction, and then I'm going to show you the results. And I hope as a result of that, you say to yourself, I wonder if we can do this in my school, in my classroom next year. So our hypothesis was that if you align what goes on in the content area classrooms with what goes on in reading intervention, that you are going to accelerate learning, you're going to eliminate guesswork for students, you're going to support generalization of skills across the setting, and you're going to provide these additional deliberate practice opportunities, which yields overall improved reading comprehension. So we know that there's some previous research on aligning intervention, but there's not much, and it was done at the elementary level. And it was done in first grade in reading, and it was done with professional development, in which the professional development for tier 1 and tier 2 was aligned. And these are studies that were conducted in 2015 and 2008. But no studies had looked at how we can do this in reading comprehension for students in grades 4 through 12. So we decided to focus on older students, and we decided to focus on comprehension. And the alignment of the instruction for tiers 1 and 2 is over in that right column. So look at where it says examples of aligning instructional practice. One of the ways we did it is we did it through Get the Gist, our main idea. We did it with guided practice, and we did it with practicing writing gists with a partner, our main ideas with a partner. We also made sure that these exact practices taught in the same way were learned both in classrooms in the content area, and we started with social studies, and also in the literacy intervention. So we didn't teach them in different ways. We taught them in the same way. We broke the skills down into smaller steps, just like Dr. Archer would want us to do, across several weeks of instruction. We repeated opportunities for practice, and we front loaded. And what I mean by front loading is that we taught these skills in the intervention and then front loaded them for tier 1 or content area so that students had already been exposed to them prior to them being taught in the classroom. But they were all taught in the same way in both settings. So just to kind of give you an idea about the research design, how we had this aligned, where the intervention practices are taught the same in intervention and content area and not aligned. And then we had a business as usual. So we had what's called a 3-arm study, where students with reading difficulties are randomly assigned to the aligned instruction, the not aligned instruction, and the BA business as usual condition. And just to be clear, in the aligned instruction, students received the same intervention in intervention and in content area. And the non-aligned, they received the same instruction only in tier 2. And in BAU condition, they did not get the instruction. They got typically what teachers would provide. Okay, so that's the aligned condition. That's the not aligned condition. And this is the number of participants. We had 305 who did not pass the high stakes assessment. We got parental consent from 195, and then we randomly assigned the students with reading difficulties to the 3 conditions. And just so you can get a quick look at the demographics to see what our population looked like, you can see that we had about half of the students were males and were female. You can see that about 20% of the students were limited English proficient, and that about 30% of the students were identified as either students with dyslexia or students with reading disabilities. Okay. And so let's take a look at what we did in these aligned conditions. So remember, I said that we aligned the instruction between social studies and reading intervention. And we did this by using information text that was represented the content that students were asked to learn in social studies. And we used these big ideas in which we connected new learning to past learning, and we built knowledge using these visuals to explain new information and asking questions. So here's an example of the kind of text that we used, in which we were teaching students about an archaeologist and how that related to the social studies unit. And remember, we use these in both the literacy intervention as well as in the social studies intervention. And again, we worked really hard to be sure the practices that we used were very organized so that they were taught the same way in both places. So as an example, if we were teaching vocabulary, the vocabulary word here that we were focusing on was artifact, and you can see that in the middle of the slide. And we always had an illustration that would go with the key vocabulary word. And then we would have what we would consider to be a user-friendly definition, such as an object made by people that is usually very old. And then we set the context for learning the word. We had word associations in which the word was related to 2 other words. we gave students an opportunity to provide an example of that word. And then we always had time for a time and talk, in which we had, a turn and talk, in which students would partner share a key idea around the keyword. So that vocabulary practice, that routine was taught the same way in Tier 1 and Tier 2 in the aligned condition, but not taught the same way. Whatever they did in Tier 1 in the Tier 2 instruction in the non-aligned, and then the business as usual was whatever the teachers usually did. And we also taught students the gist. And with the gist, we taught students to think about the question type, like who, what, when, where, why, and how. And we asked them to come up with an example of a question type. So we actually taught them to generate questions. And remember, the most important part of question generation when you're focusing on reading comprehension isn't question generation on the part of the adult, the teacher. It's question generation on the part of the student. And here's the tricky thing. If we, as the teachers, do all the asking of the questions, we get all the benefits of learning. And since I like to think that most of us are already proficient readers, we really want to be sure that the group that gets the practice are the students. And so we want to teach them these question types around who, what, when, where, why, and how. Teach them how to use those question types to generate questions so they become the question generator. And you can set up all kinds of really super fun games where students ask questions and call on other students, or teams ask questions, or you create question cards in which they write a question on one side and the answer on the other. But you really want to move students to the point where they become proficient at these various question types in terms of asking them and answering them. Okay. In addition to the question types, so we had text that was information text, vocabulary that was taught using the same routine, question generation in which students learn to ask and answer questions, and fourthly, get the gist. And with get the gist, we wanted students to be able to utilize a portion of text, usually 1 to 2 paragraphs, and to be able to answer the following questions in the Get the Gist cue card, which is down at the bottom of this slide. And the Get the Gist cue card asks, what is the most important who or what in the paragraph? So students just start with who or what this paragraph is about. Then they move to telling the most important idea about the who or what, and then writing a gist in 10 words or less. Now, for those of you in the audience that think that they are teaching main idea, because I thought that too, I will explain to you how I used to teach main idea. I would ask students to read a paragraph, and then I would say, what's the main idea? That's how I taught main idea. I would just ask students to tell me what it was. And I realized that unless I got them to unpack it in the following way, I wasn't teaching them main idea, I was asking them about the main idea. So if you look, for example, here under Get the Gist, the breakdown of how to move students from this big idea of what is the main idea to breaking it apart to what is the most important who or what or the most important thing about it. You can also see in this cue card here that gist questions allow students to end up with a gist statement. And this gist statement, the importance of it being 10 words or less is not important, but the importance of it being succinct and clear, which is why we choose 10 words or less, just so students do not, if you will, ramble on and have their gist statement be longer than the paragraph they just read. Okay, so if you want to get a sense of how we taught this, remember in the aligned condition in both the treatment and the intervention, you can see that over a variety of paragraphs, so if students were reading a text that were, let's say, 2 to 3 pages long, there might be 10 to 12 paragraphs. And so you can see on the left side that we have students writing a gist for each segment of text. And this way, these gists can go together to create summary statements. So if you will, we had measures prior to and following this experimental study in order to determine whether the aligned condition was as effective as we would hope it would be. And so we had unit tests, vocabulary test, strategy test, comprehension test, and we had distal measures of comprehension, which are the grade. And so let's take a look at the results and see how students in the aligned condition did. So if you look at this graph, and I have a bar graph represented, as well as the means and standard deviations and the effect sizes. So if you look at the G, that's Hedges G, and those are effect sizes. And if you look at the color bar chart, what you'll see is that the dark blue is the aligned condition. The green is the typical intervention, and the orange is the comparison condition, also known as the business as usual condition. And what you will see is that the aligned students who were in the aligned condition far surpassed students in the other conditions, even students in the intervention condition. And the reason I want you to see how striking this is because students in the intervention were taught the same strategies as students in the aligned condition. The only difference is that in the aligned condition, the students were taught the same practices the same way, both in intervention and in the classroom. And this alignment really yielded a much more powerful outcome. And of course, Dr. Anita Archer would have said, well, of course it would, because they get additional practice and additional feedback. But the of course they would is important to prove. And this proof of concept in this study really allows us to encourage, and in fact, perhaps more than encourage, really require schools to think about why this is important and how they might align their instruction in their school. And so this is also true when you look at the vocabulary measures. Again, look at the aligned condition and the number of words students learned compared to students in the other condition. And then if you look at the content reading comprehension assessment, a much more difficult measure, the differences are not statistically significant in favor of the aligned condition, but they're practically significant. And so overall, the results clearly favor the aligned condition. And if you want to see that again in terms of growth over time by condition, let's look at the grade passage comprehension, which is an extremely difficult reading comprehension measure. And you can see that in this condition, the aligned condition and the typical intervention outperformed the comparison condition. So let's think about what this means. Students in the aligned condition outperform students in the non-aligned and in the business as usual conditions on reading comprehension, content knowledge, and vocabulary outcomes. And the effect sizes are not small. The effect sizes are quite large. They ranged from 4.5 to 9.9. Those are very high effect sizes for older readers. Secondly, while there was no significant difference on content reading comprehension, the effect sizes favored the aligned condition. So this preliminary support for the benefit of lining Tier 1 and Tier 2 for students with reading difficulties. We know that students in this aligned condition outperform students in the non-aligned condition. And we have several explanations for why that might be the case and for you to think about. One is that we have this front loading, which improves access to Tier 1, and also that students in the aligned condition received twice the instructional time and practice. Now, here's what's important. It's not just dosage. It's this deliberate practice in which it was aligned, because students got the practice in the non-aligned condition. It's just that they got different kinds of practice in those two settings. So we think this is really important and something to think about. So because of this, we always, because I'm a researcher, have to talk about some of the limitations, which is we want the sample size to be larger. We know that the feasibility of this approach is somewhat challenging because it requires a coordinated effort. And we know that it requires personnel and instructional time to be sure that this aligned instruction is taking place. And we want to better understand some of the contextual findings around this alignment. So my colleague, Elizabeth Stevens, and I wrote an IES grant that was just funded so that we could so that we could conduct a large-scale study about the effectiveness of aligned instruction with older students. So stay tuned. We're going to have more to say about this in the near future. Hold on to your questions. At the end, I'm going to save time. So write your questions down, keep track of them, don't lose them because I want to hear them. Now, I mentioned to you early on this idea of aligning and embedding as being critical for secondary readers. And so I'm going to show you what I mean by embedding by providing an example of an intervention that looks at the integration of reading instruction with anxiety management. And you may say, oh, that's really interesting. Why anxiety management? And the reason, and this article is published in Journal of Learning Disabilities, the reason is because when students, older readers, have accumulated period of time in which their weak reading keeps them from perceiving themselves as effective readers, which also creates anxiety about reading. And this anxiety becomes a cognitive blocker that keeps students from reading successfully. It's like it double downs on the negative effects of poor reading. Because once you become anxious, you get this sort of flood of thoughts and ideas that interfere with your ability to tackle the comprehension of text as effectively and efficiently as you need to. So we wondered, what would happen if we integrated anxiety management practices into our reading intervention in order to get a double effect, that was our goal, of reduced anxiety and increased reading. So we looked at the effects of an integrated reading plus anxiety management intervention with comparison for a business as usual condition for students with reading difficulties in the older grades. So how we did this is we started with grades 3, 4, and then we advanced to 5th and 6th, so all the way up to 6th grade at risk for reading difficulties, and we randomly assigned them to RANX. If you think ANX as anxiety, it's reading and anxiety, so that's one condition. The second condition is reading math, and the reason we blocked on math was to have a block for the amount of time we taught the anxiety. And then the third one is business as usual. So again, the participant pool included about equal number of males and females. We had a slightly larger number of Hispanics than any other racial representation. And we had some students who spoke Spanish at home, but were learning to read in English. And so this is our assessments. We provided this instruction for 2 years, and we had pre-test and post-test at the beginning and end of each of the 2 years. And we had about 75 lessons that focused on reading and anxiety in the ranks group, our reading and math in the other group, and business as usual was whatever the school provided. So the intervention occurred about 4 to 5 times a week for about a 30-minute session. There were 75 sessions in small groups, and all the personnel providing the interventions were hired, trained, and supervised by our research team. So to kind of give you an idea of what the components were of this reading and anxiety management, each of these columns represents one of the foci of the work that we did. So there was word reading, which focused on vowel sounds, because with older readers, for the most part, vowels, vowel diphthongs, and multisyllable words are the challenge. So that's what we focused on. And we also focused on high frequency words that they were not extremely fluent at. The second column focuses on text fluency, in which we were really trying to get students to read at above 80 words correct per minute, which is a nice threshold for students being able to read with reduced cognitive monitoring, increasing the likelihood for comprehension. The third column is stretch text, and our stretch text is text in which it's slightly challenging for them. So the content, either the social studies and science content, or the academic vocabulary, or the, if you will, reading level overall, was slightly elevated based on their actual ability to read the text. But we could do that because we had small group instruction in which the features of the instruction were specified and highlighted by teachers. And then we had this other component that we integrated into the instruction. It wasn't separated. And this is called the Strong Students Toolbox. And in the Strong Students Toolbox, we were able to teach students to identify the signs of anxiety. So when their hands got sweaty or when they started feeling anxious, strategies to cope with that anxiety, what they could do to calm themselves and relieve anxiety. And we did this integrated into the reading instruction, approximately 5 to 10 minutes a day across each of the sessions. And in the reading and math components, everything was the same, except that we did not provide the anxiety intervention. We provided math facts as a blocker in the experimental design for the anxiety. So if you look at the treatment fidelity, what you will see is that our treatment fidelity was high, both in the reading and anxiety condition and the reading and math condition. 4 would be the maximum that you could get in terms of fidelity, and ours was 3.5 and up to 3.86. And in the business as usual condition, many people want to know what's going on. There's a variety of things that go on. Some of the students receive small group instruction. Most of this instruction ranged with approximately 1 to 5 students per teacher. And students who did not receive a small group intervention were typically asked to work on reading tasks independently with their peers. And so if you look at the overlap in the treatment conditions based on fidelity, you can see that there's relatively low overlap with BAU, except for the focus on text comprehension. And of course, it's almost impossible, or it should be impossible, to have a reading intervention that doesn't focus on text comprehension with this age group. If you want to know what reading measures we used the test of word reading efficiency, the test of silent reading efficiency, the Kaufman test of educational achievement, the Gates-McGinnity, and then this mini RC, which is a it looks a lot like what we teachers would value, but it's standardized in terms of text reading and answering questions. It's a reading comprehension measure. And if you want to get an idea of what it looks like, if you look at the paragraph on the right, that looks very much like the kind of paragraph you would get in high stakes assessments. And then there's questions about what are sand dunes and what does the word preserve mean, etc. So, and then on the other side, you can see that we have yes, no questions about does it make sense? You know, for example, the Lopez family has a new puppy named Daisy. She was a playful puppy. She especially liked playing with a garden hose. She loved to watch the hose wiggle like a snake when she pulled on it. And so then they would have to answer yes or no, and what part did or didn't make sense. We also, because we were focused on anxiety in one of our measures, had anxiety measures. We had the Beck Youth Inventory, we had the multidimensional anxiety scale, we had the MASC social anxiety scale, and then we had a reading anxiety scale. And just to kind of give you an idea, the reading anxiety scale asks students to reflect on questions about how anxious they were with respect to various reading tasks. So to kind of show you which of these approaches was most effective, remember that the reading anxiety and the reading math conditions had exactly the same lessons for reading. The only difference was the anxiety measure. So let's look first at the outcomes on reading. If you look at the blue bar line, that represents the reading and anxiety group. If you look at the orange bar line, that represents the reading and math group, exactly the same instruction in reading, but none of the anxiety management. And then the gray line is whatever reading intervention the schools provided. And the outcome measure in this particular slide is the Gates-McGinty reading test. And that's a reading comprehension measure. And you can see that that there is growth from pre-test to post-test, but that the more significant growth is with the reading and anxiety measure. If you look at the test of word reading efficiency, you see a similar profile, with the reading and math and the business as usual looking very similar, a small amount of growth, but not as significant as the reading and anxiety. If you look at the test of silent reading efficiency, a similar profile with a closer projection between reading and math and reading anxiety. The Kaufman test of reading comprehension, and the mini RC, that's the reading comprehension measure in which they read paragraphs and answer questions. And again, consistently in all of these slides, the blue line represents reading and anxiety, the orange line reading and math, and the gray line business as usual. And many of you might be interested in what the effect sizes are. And so those effect sizes are represented as Hedges G in the farthest right column. So whether you're comparing the reading and anxiety to business as usual, which we are in this particular case on all of the measures, or if you're combining the reading anxiety versus reading and math, which is also represented as effect sizes on this slide, you will see that the reading and anxiety condition in which students were learning to manage their anxiety embedded within the reading intervention was associated with stronger impact than the other conditions. So, regardless of researcher or school-provided treatment, students appear to show gains in reading across most measures. The gains were comparable to those yielded in previous interventions with upper elementary struggling readers. It may be necessary to provide more intensive interventions and or to align reading interventions with evidence-based Tier 1 instruction. So, let's look at the effects on anxiety, since one of the goals of the reading and anxiety intervention was to reduce anxiety. When you look at these slides, it's important to realize that what we want to happen is we want reduction. We want the graph line to go down. And the reason is because we're looking at anxiety and we want the amount of anxiety represented to decline, not increase. So again, in these slides, when we look at anxiety, you will see that the blue line represents students in the reading and anxiety treatment, and you will see that they did decline overall over time, as did the students in the other reading condition. However, the decline was slightly greater in the reading and anxiety condition. And in terms of the physical symptoms, you will see that in both reading conditions, the physical symptoms associated with anxiety declined. And if you look at social anxiety, again, you get a greater decline for students in the reading and anxiety condition. And this is true for all of our conditions, with effect sizes being negative, meaning that's a positive thing. The negative means that there's a decline in anxiety. So these results suggest that with the reading anxiety measure, not only were we able to improve reading outcomes, but we were able to reduce anxiety, and we were able to do it by embedding it into the intervention. So I'm going to return to my overall premise from the beginning, which is that we really want to think about making our instruction more parsimonious. I use the word subtraction, meaning stop expanding all of these different practices. Stop adding many, many strategies. Focus on several critical practices. Focus on aligning them throughout your instruction so that we're doing the same practices across content areas and intervention. And then think about ways to embed some of the most important self-regulatory practices. The example I provide today is around anxiety as mechanisms for improving outcomes in reading, but also outcomes in other practices such as reducing anxiety. So With that in mind, I hope I have persuaded you that there are ways we can address more effectively instruction for adolescents that will allow them to be successful, both with reading comprehension and self-regulation. And so I now hope that I can invite you to make comments, ask questions, and the questions can be related to my presentation. That's perfectly fine. Or if you have other questions related to adolescent literacy, I invite you to ask them at this time. So perhaps someone will repeat the questions just to be sure everyone in the audience hears them and to be sure that I hear them. So perhaps we could get started.
Okay, so questions. And we'll run the mic.
We are curious about what the anxiety management instruction would look like and how that would be embedded into reading practice, what the anxiety management piece, since it works, what is it?
Yeah, I do have a set of slides, and maybe I can share them with Patton about what we do for anxiety management. So we have this anxiety management toolkit. Let me just tell you a couple of things we do. One of the things we do is we really take just a couple of minutes in every lesson and teach students to recognize their anxiety. So the model that this anxiety management practices is based on is a cognitive behavioral approach that's used really across anxiety management instruction or in treatments. And so taking stock of where you are, and then we also teach students what to do to manage their anxiety. And we have a set of practices in which we engage this little squirrel who helps them realize that they're anxious and then what to do about it. And we also embed a lot of reading practice around anxiety. And so students actually read about other students who have anxiety. And we also read about what anxiety feels like. And then we use that as part of the reading text. So we actually integrate reading and anxiety management within. And so I do have some sample lessons, which I can share with all of you. And maybe when I'm guessing that Patton will be sharing some of these slides, maybe some of these practices can be also visible to you. And if I can encourage you to go to the Meadows Center website, it's actually really easy to remember. If you know what a meadow looks like, MEADOW, so it's meadowscenter.org. And we have a lot of free materials, resources, lessons, and we have a lot of them on adolescent literacy as well. So thank you for asking about that. And I hope you're able to access some of those lessons as well.
Lacey, you want to go?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Quick question about the intervention strategies that were done that were discipline specific to social studies. Did
Yeah.
all teachers in all content areas work to be able to implement those in the classrooms? And how large were the groups?
Yeah. Really good questions. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the answer based on the study I presented, and then I'm going to tell you the answer based on a different study I've done. Okay, so let me talk about the study I just presented. In the study I just presented, we worked in social studies classrooms. They all used exactly the same practices, and they had classroom sizes that were about 20 to 25, depending upon the class. So they weren't doing it as part of intervention. It was just aligned with the intervention. The intervention classes were more like 3 to 5, okay? So that we only did that in social studies. However, I do not think it should only be done in social studies. I think it should be done across the content area. And so I have another project that I did not present today because I did not have time to present all the projects I'm doing. But in another study, we are asking social studies, science, math, and English language arts teachers across the middle grades to use the exact same practices for vocabulary and comprehension. And we're making them, remember, I'm into parsimonious. We make them very simple. and they all do the same ones. And I really think this very deliberate, focused, connected instruction is going to be hugely beneficial. Because think about it this way. You're a student that has trouble reading. You go into social studies, and the social studies teacher, if they teach any of the critical components of reading, teaches them one way. Then you go into science, and the science teacher teaches you to do it a different way. And then you go to English language arts, and they teach you to do it a third way. And so you basically put the burden of integrating all of these practices onto students who are the weakest readers. Why would we do that? Could you imagine learning how to play golf, and every single time you went out to play golf, the person taught you how to do this in a completely different way? I mean, actually, I think I sort of had that happen, which is why I have a lousy golf swing. But the approach to having some consistency in acquiring proficiency before we get diversity of application of that proficiency seems pretty important to me.
Dr. Vaughn, I know you spoke about fidelity a little bit, and in
Yeah.
this secondary type environment, thinking back to the first study, can you talk a little bit more about what the schedule looked like for those students in terms of their tier 1, but then also what tier 2 schedules looked like, and just try to processing what that looked like on a daily basis, and then how your team and or people that were working with you provided fidelity to the processes?
Yeah. Well, these are such good questions. Where did you find these sophisticated people? My gosh.
Pennsylvania, it's Pennsylvania educators. We expect no less.
I'm telling you, I mean, I'm used to questions like, what is a gist? Okay. So, all right. So, but these are hard questions. I personally think that one of the most challenging things about working in schools is scheduling.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, we think it's like pedagogy or management, but it's really scheduling. The whole world revolves around these schedules. It's very difficult. What we do is we have one intervention period a day, and that intervention period, if you do block schedule, then it's 2 1 week, 3 the next. I personally am not a fan of block scheduling, but we love block scheduling because it's good for teachers, not for children. And so but I prefer that they have access to instruction every day. So I prefer that it's a shorter amount of time, that we use the time well, because my observation in block schedules is it elongates the time, but you don't actually get more instructional time. You just elongate the period because it's convenient for the adults, which is me. But I don't think it's the best thing for the students. So the schedule is that they get one intervention period for about 45 minutes to 50 minutes, 5 times a week. And then in the content areas, they get the content area instruction they would typically get. In terms of aligning it, and getting fidelity, it really is about not making it complicated. So we do not teach every instructional practice from the beginning. Let me tell you what I think will work. Number 1, choose one practice. So let's say it's main idea. Teach every one of your content area teachers how to do get the gist. Suggest that they do it 1 to 2 times a week. If you tell them to do it every day, they'll never do it. If you tell them to do it 1 to 2 times a week, they will do it at least 1 to 2 times a week. And give them examples of how they can do it in their content area. Once they can ramp up gist, so let's say over 15 or 20 weeks, and you provide support and they're getting gist going across the content area, then add question generation. Okay? Don't have a professional development in which you teach them all of these strategies at the same time. It will be a complete bust. You have to do a build-up where they do one set of strategies for 15 to 20 weeks, then you add the second set, then you add the third set. Do not add more than 3. The 3 I would use are get the gist, question generation, and vocabulary acquisition. Those are the 3. And then you can get high fidelity across the content area. I don't know if that was helpful, but come back with another question if I didn't get it right.
And any more questions?
Hi, I noticed that a lot of your research, you didn't list down that you use like English language development students, and especially with anxiety, there's a lot of anxiety learning a new language. Is that something you're interested in looking into later?
That's a really good question. I'm almost interested in everything, which is a problem. And so the answer would be yes. But I have not done that work. But I think it sounds like really interesting work. I can see why you would ask that, because there's nothing more anxiety provoking than to be in a situation in which you maybe understand reasonably well what's happening, but production of language is difficult for you. That's very anxiety provoking. I can see why you would ask that question, and I don't know how well investigated it is.
Good morning. So first, Dr. Vaughn, I want to thank you for sharing these studies with us. One of the things that really caught my attention was the text reading with questioning and the gist statements. So I wanted your input on what role do you think annotation or talking to the text plays in those strategies? Or do you think that's maybe adding one practice too many?
Yeah, I know that secondary teachers love annotation. And if you tell them not to do annotation, you might as well, you're violating like a highly prioritized skill. I just don't know how well annotation helps. I'm confident it helps some students. I'm not confident it helps all of them. I think the jury's out on annotation. And when I say jury's out, it doesn't mean that I think it doesn't work. I just don't think we know that it does work. And so I'm kind of, on a 10-point scale, I'm 5 to 6 on annotation. You can't do everything. I'm just telling you, all paths lead nowhere. All paths lead nowhere. You just keep piling on stuff, and before you know it, teachers don't do anything well. Because it's like, why should I bother? Every time I go to professional development, they tell me another thing to do. The first thing I would do if I was working with secondary teachers, which I do this all the time, is I start with what we're not going to do anymore. Let's take stuff out of our repertoire. And then we're going to add one thing. Do you see what I mean? Because this piling on and layering of all these practices it's like my closet. I can't put one more thing in my closet. I have got to start taking things out. And I really think we have to think about instruction that way too.
We have a question. It's going to take me a second to get there.
Did we have another question?
Sorry, I just wanted to see how you weigh in on teachers reading aloud to their students. Teachers are getting frustrated with students not reading on their own, so they've started incorporating reading the text aloud. I kind of feel like that's counterproductive to what we're trying to do with reading. What do you think on that?
Oh my gosh. Does anyone in that audience have an easy question?
No.
You guys are killing me. Okay. So
And remember, she got up at like 4 in the morning. Okay.
yeah, that's true. I'm going back to bed after this. You should see what's on under this. I have my pajamas on under my dress. Okay. So here's the answer to that question. We have two goals. They're both important. One is we want students to learn how to read. That is extremely important. And we have to build the foundations for that. And I talked about that earlier. We have to get all of those practices that I talked about across the content area so we can get kids learning how to read. So they have to have text practice every day. I have a mandate that every teacher exposes students to text that they are expected to read for 50 minutes a week. Now, that's not that bad. Like, I'm a social studies teacher. I can't figure out how to have text integrated into my instruction 10 minutes a day. 50 minutes, and it doesn't have to be 10 minutes a day. It can be 20 minutes on Monday, 20 minutes on Wednesday, 10 minutes on Friday, right? I don't care how you divide it, but 50 minutes of deliberate, organized instruction in which students are reading text every day. Okay, that for me is baseline mandate. Now, remember, I said there's two goals. One of the goals is that students become more proficient at reading, right? And we just talked about that. But the second goal is knowledge acquisition, right? We want students to know things. We want them to know about things, and we want them to know complicated things. And so there are ways to do that. We can have smart 3 to 4 minute videos, right? That's one way to do it. We can have PowerPoints that have a couple of pithy ideas that help students make connections. We can have the sage on the stage who stands up and talks and tells them about things, right? And we can read selective passages that are high priority passages that build knowledge. So I am not ex-nay on teachers reading aloud. I am ex-nay on teachers only reading aloud and not doing the rest of those things I talked about. Does that help?
Yes, she says. All right, any more? Oh, Sharon, Stacy's, yeah, there's another Dr. Vaughn, just a moment.
Yeah. Is this my last question?
It is actually, we have to break to get ready for the next session.
I know, this is it for you people. So let's make this one like not so hard.
I think this is probably a simple question.
I hope.
How many vocabulary words? So are these words that are only from the text that they're reading? Are we inundating them with 7 words a week, 1 a day? You know, is there a guideline for how many words?
Yeah. Oh man. You gotta be kidding me. Okay. So no, it's actually not a simple question. And you can add it and make it even more complicated by adding this. How do you pick the words? So, the number of words that you teach are the number of words the majority of the students will remember in 2 weeks. That's how you know. And so for most teachers, it's about 5 to 7 words a week. Okay, so if I'm a social studies teacher, it's about 5 to 7. Now, you may have a class where you can do 9. You may have a class where you can only do 4. But the goal isn't how many, it's how many they know in 2 weeks. Because if we expose them to 50 words a week, but in 2 weeks they know 0, we have made not only little progress, we're going backwards because we're not using our time well. So that's the answer to the question. How many are they going to know in 2 weeks? Number 2, which words? Okay, the simple answer to which words are the ones they don't know. But of course, that's a smart aleck answer. There's no right answer, but pick words that are very useful, that are related to the unit that you're teaching, and that will give students the maximum opportunity to use those words so that they remember them.
Well, I have to say, Dr. Vaughn, what an amazing presentation, and you got up so early. We are so grateful. Pennsylvania educators, you have to give this huge round of applause to Dr. Vaughn.
Well, actually, I just,
I hope you can hear that, heard that applause and how loud it was. We're so grateful.
you.
Thank you.
No, it's really a pleasure to be with such incredibly capable educators. I tease you about your questions, but it was really a signal to me of how capable you are. And it's really an honor to be there with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day and get some rest.
Oh, I will. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We are going to get ready for our first session that will begin at 10. This is going to be closed here in just a moment to have a conference room 1 over here and conference room 2 over there. Okay, thank you. And we'll see you at 11 for lunch.